They say the coldest winters aren't measured in temperature, but in loneliness. For James Walker, a 62-year-old veteran sitting on a patch of frozen sidewalk in New York City, the wind wasn't just biting, it was erasing him. Every gust of icy air felt like another reminder that the world had moved on without him. Just months ago, James had a job, a modest apartment, and the quiet dignity of a man who served his country. Now his home was a flattened cardboard box, and his most valuable possession was a faded photo of his wife and son, both taken from him in a single tragic accident. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His heart condition, left untreated for too long, left him dizzy and weak. Still, he clung to his pride. Veterans like him didn't beg. But on this particular morning, something broke inside him. And in a moment of quiet desperation, he decided to ask someone, just one person, for help. What he didn't expect was that the person would be Barron Trump. What followed was not only a chance encounter, but a turning point in both their lives. Because sometimes the smallest request, a single dollar, can open the door to a future no one saw coming. But what exactly did Barron do when James spoke to him? And how did it lead to a crowd gathering, a phone call that changed everything, and a life lifted from the edge? Before we begin, help us reach 1,000 subscribers by clicking the button below. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, your support makes all the difference. The sun hadn't yet burned through the gray January haze. James pulled his thin jacket tighter, exhaling steam into the frigid air. His fingers were numb, his legs stiff from hours of sitting on the unforgiving concrete. At his side, a weathered backpack held everything he owned: a spare pair of socks, a worn military ID, a few pill bottles from the VA, and a single crease photograph. In it, Sarah, his wife, smiling, arms around their teenage son, Michael. Sarah had been his compass, his anchor. Michael, his future. But a decade ago, a drunk driver stole both from him. And James, who'd once kept order as a military police sergeant in Desert Storm, found himself battling an enemy he couldn't arrest: grief. As people rushed past, their lives busy and their eyes averted, James felt what every person on the street eventually does: invisibility. He wasn't just poor, he was unseen. A relic, discarded by the same country he'd fought to defend. He never asked for money. Not really, Sarah used to say. Pride is worth more than gold. So even now, starving, shivering, he simply sat, counting the 27 cents in his pocket like they might magically multiply. But something was different today. A whisper in the wind, a restlessness in his chest. A memory surfaced: Michael, as a boy, chasing candy wrappers in the wind and calling them butterflies. Sarah's laugh echoing across a spring morning. His eyes stung, but it wasn't the cold. As he sat by the subway entrance, his usual spot, James noticed a shift in the crowd's behavior. People had stopped. Phones were raised. A subtle ripple of energy flowed through the commuters. Then he saw them, black-suited security guards, moving with tight formation, eyes scanning. Their pattern was familiar. It was protection protocol. James had walked similar formations himself, back in his days securing foreign dignitaries. And then he saw him, tall for his age, well-dressed, but not flashy. Sharp-featured. Something about the teenager's presence was composed. Familiar. James blinked. Is that? No. But yes, it was unmistakable. Barron Trump. James didn't feel resentment, just curiosity, and a strange flutter in his chest. Not hope exactly. He'd long since stopped hoping. But maybe, just maybe, it was permission to speak. Permission to be seen. As Barron and his entourage passed, James's body moved before his mind caught up. He stood, legs shaking, breath catching in his throat. His vision blurred with dizziness and doubt. Never beg, Sarah's voice warned in his head. Keep your dignity. But then came another voice, Michael's. Softer, younger. If we can help, but don't, what does that make us? James swallowed hard, his throat dry. One step, then another. The security detail tensed, one of them reaching toward his radio. James felt the pressure, the shame. He was moments away from retreating. And then Barron turned. Their eyes met, just for a second, but something passed between them. Something human. Something real. James took a breath. His voice cracked like dried leaves. "Could you spare a dollar?" The street went silent around him. Even the wind seemed to pause. Barron didn't recoil. He didn't dismiss the man in front of him. Instead, he said something no one expected. "Give us a moment, please." He stepped forward. The guards exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. The space around them widened. And for the first time in what felt like years, James Walker was no longer invisible. Before we continue, we want to know something from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? It amazes us how far these stories travel, and we'd love to know where they're reaching hearts. As Barron approached, his eyes locked on James's military ID clipped to his jacket. Without needing to ask, he said, "You're a veteran." "Yes, sir." "Staff Sergeant James Walker." "Desert Storm." Barron nodded, respectful. His gaze was sharp, but not judging. James braced for pity. But what he saw instead was interest, recognition. Like Barron saw more than a homeless man. He saw a person, a father, a soldier. The crowd was growing. Phones were out. James felt his cheeks burn. Tomorrow I'll be a meme, he thought bitterly. Homeless vet begs Trump's son. But then Barron said something no camera could predict. "You've been here all week, haven't you?" James blinked. "You read the newspaper someone leaves on the bench. You helped a woman yesterday when her groceries fell." James's voice was barely a whisper. "You noticed me?" Barron nodded. "I notice a lot." And that's when everything began to shift. The moment that would change James's life forever and reveal something the world never expected from Barron Trump. Subscribe now if you haven't yet. We're just getting started. What happens next will leave you speechless. Barron Trump stood just inches from James, his presence cutting through the cold more than the sun ever could. There was no camera crew orchestrating this moment, no PR stunt unfolding. Just a teenage boy looking at an older man and seeing something most had long forgotten how to recognize: dignity beneath the dirt. James, still trembling, clutched the edges of his coat like it was the only anchor left in a sea of uncertainty. But something about Barron's steady voice calmed him. "Why today?" Barron asked quietly. "Why ask me?" The question struck deeper than James expected. He could have said it was because he hadn't eaten, because the soup kitchen felt like a mile away, or because he was too cold to wait any longer. But none of those things were true, not really. "You reminded me of my son," James finally admitted. "Michael, you're about his age, and something in your eyes. You reminded me of him." There was a flicker in Barron's expression. Something softened, and then, almost imperceptibly, he took another step forward, placing himself in James's bitter wind to shield him from it. Behind them, a security guard shifted nervously. A woman in a designer coat stepped closer, curious. "Barron, what are you doing? Can we help?" He didn't turn. His voice was calm but firm. "Please give us a moment." Then he reached into his pocket. The guards tensed again. But instead of pulling out cash, Barron retrieved his phone. "Mr. Walker," he said, addressing James with surprising formality, "do you mind waiting here for just a few minutes? I need to make a call." James could only nod. He watched as Barron stepped aside, still within earshot, and dialed a number. "Dad's office. This is Barron. I need to speak to the property manager at the tower." "Yes, it's urgent." James felt a strange sensation stir in his chest. Was this really happening? Was the son of a former president making calls on his behalf? He reached down and touched the edges of the worn photograph in his bag. Sarah's face, Michael's bright smile. What would they say if they could see him now? Barron paced in a tight circle, cradling the phone against his shoulder and typing rapidly into a tablet handed to him by one of the guards. The wind picked up again, cutting through James's jacket like a blade. He shivered. Then, without missing a beat in his conversation, Barron shrugged off his own coat and handed it to James. "You don't have to," James began, but Barron cut him off with a quiet look. Not rude, not dismissive, just determined. It was the kind of look Michael used to give him when he'd insist on doing something his way, despite James's objections. James accepted the coat. The weight of it, the warmth, felt overwhelming. He'd worn uniforms, body armor, and winter gear in the desert. But this felt like something more. It felt like armor made of compassion. As Barron continued his call, James caught fragments of the conversation. Yes, I understand. But this is important. Yes, I'll hold. Another call. Another set of instructions. Barron wasn't asking for charity. He was orchestrating a solution. Eventually, he turned to James again. Mr. Walker, he said, I have a few personal questions. If that's okay. James nodded again. When was your last full checkup? 3 months ago. The VA said my heart condition was worsening. I lost my job because of it. Couldn't blame them. Nobody wants a guard who might collapse during a shift. Barron took a note on the tablet. And what did you do in the military? Military police. 22 years. Staff sergeant. After Desert Storm, I went civilian. Night security until he trailed off, touching his chest again. Barron nodded. Thank you. He spoke into the phone again. Yes, that's correct. MP background. Civilian security. Fully verified. Thank you, sir. James felt lightheaded. Not from hunger now, but from disbelief. This young man was doing more in 20 minutes than the entire system had done for him in years. I've arranged a room for you, Barron said, approaching with the tablet still in hand. At our hotel, just a few blocks from here. It's covered for the month. No strings. No obligations. You'll have a permanent address again. James's jaw dropped slightly. He struggled to process the words. There's more, Barron continued before he could protest. There's a position opening at Trump Tower. A security consultant role, light duty, mostly training and protocol reviews. They'd like to meet you this afternoon. James's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but the lump in his chest wouldn't let the words out. Still, Barron wasn't done. I've also contacted the Manhattan VA. You'll have a full medical checkup tomorrow, expedited and covered through our Veteran Support Foundation. They'll also help fast-track your housing application. James choked back a sound, a mix between a sob and a laugh. Why, he whispered. Why are you doing all this? Barron looked him square in the eye. You asked for $1. The smallest request you could think of. But you gave me the chance to do something that mattered. My mother always says, to whom much is given, much is expected. James closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the tears that fell weren't from sorrow, but from gratitude. You made it this far. Thank you. If you're feeling something too, consider subscribing so we can keep sharing stories that remind us of our shared humanity. We got more to uncover. The black SUV pulled up to the curb. Mr. Walker, Barron said gently, would you like to wait in the car? It's warm, and I promise, this isn't a trick to make you disappear. I'll be right behind you. James hesitated, then nodded. The warmth of the vehicle wrapped around him like a memory he thought he'd forgotten. Comfort. Safety. Worth. Outside, Barron remained on the phone. His coat now cloaked James, but his determination was just beginning. And inside that car, a man who had lost everything finally felt seen. What happens when the world watches a Trump give more than expected? The leather seat cradled James like a long-lost friend. It had been so long since he'd sat in anything that wasn't cold, cracked, or temporary. He looked down at his trembling hands, still clutching the bottle of water a security guard, Johnson, he'd said, had handed him. His breath slowed, just slightly, as warmth seeped into his bones. Outside the SUV's tinted window, Barron paced with a phone in one hand and a tablet in the other. The teenager was still coordinating, still calling, still moving with the urgency of someone who refused to let a man be forgotten. It was surreal. Hours ago, James had been preparing himself for another bitter, hungry day of being invisible. Now he was sitting in a luxury SUV, wrapped in the code of one of the most recognizable names in America, while that name's youngest heir fought. Yes, fought for his dignity. And James couldn't understand why. Not fully. Was this just kindness? Was it obligation? Was it guilt? But as he watched Barron smile subtly, give a quiet thumbs up to one of the guards, and return to his conversation with unwavering focus, James realized something else. This wasn't about charity. It was about choice. Barron didn't have to notice. He didn't have to act. But he did. And he kept doing it, even when the cameras came out and the whispers started. Johnson turned in the front seat, his earpiece crackling quietly. Would you like anything else, sir? Tea. Something to eat. James shook his head slowly. No, thank you. Just being here is more than I expected. Make yourself comfortable, Sergeant, Johnson said with a respectful nod. That word, Sergeant, struck James harder than he expected. He hadn't heard it spoken with that kind of sincerity in years. He sat up a little straighter, letting the weight of it settle in his chest like an old medal rediscovered. Outside, Barron finished a call, then entered the SUV and sat across from James, his face calm, but eyes bright with determination. Mr. Walker, he said, thank you for your patience. I've made a few arrangements, and I'd like to walk you through them, if that's all right. James nodded, unable to find his voice. First, Barron began, your hotel room is ready. You'll be able to check in as soon as we arrive. It's fully covered for the next 30 days. That should give you the time and stability to plan next steps. James blinked, stunned into silence. Second, Barron continued, scrolling through the tablet. The Trump Tower security team is expecting you for an informal interview this afternoon. It's a desk role, mainly reviewing training procedures and consulting. Your military and civilian experience make you a strong candidate. Still, James couldn't speak. He could only listen. Third, Barron said, his tone softening. I've spoken with the VA hospital. Your name has been fast-tracked. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., you'll be seen by their lead cardiologist. All expenses will be handled by our family foundation. James's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked down at the coat around his shoulders, then back up at the young man in front of him. Why? He whispered again. Why me? Barron paused. Then he looked directly into James's eyes and said, You reminded me of something I forgot, that everyone matters, whether the world sees them or not. You didn't ask for a handout. You asked for help, and you did it with dignity. That matters to me. James felt something shift deep inside, something slow and ancient. It was the loosening of shame, the fading of bitterness, the return of self-worth. He tried to speak, but emotion closed his throat again. I'm not done, Barron said, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and handed James a small card. This is my father's personal assistance number. If any part of this falls through, if you need help, or if someone gives you trouble, you call this number. They'll know who you are. James took the card with reverent fingers. He was speechless. And then, for the first time since Sarah's funeral, tears fell freely from his eyes. Not for grief, but from relief, from feeling like a person again. Help us continue sharing stories like this. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button now. We're just a small team trying to make voices like James's heard, and your support makes all the difference. Barron glanced at the time. The interview's at 2 o'clock. That gives you a few hours to settle in, shower, rest, and change into the suit they're sending to your room. James laughed through the tears. A suit? You've thought of everything, haven't you? Barron's smile widened. I had a good teacher. My mom always told me, when you have the power to make someone feel seen, do it. The SUV pulled away from the curb. James looked back at the crumpled cardboard that had been his bed the night before. It sat in the shadow of a building, ignored by the crowd again. But he wasn't going back to it. He wasn't going back to that version of himself. He straightened his back, pulled Barron's coat tighter, and nodded silently to the street. Thank you. Sarah would understand. Michael will be proud. He wasn't invisible anymore. And this wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning. The question now wasn't what Barron had done for him, but what James would do with the second chance he'd been given. And in the next few moments, we'll find out exactly how far one act of kindness can reach, and who else it might inspire. The SUV eased to a smooth stop in front of a towering hotel just 3 blocks from where James had been living invisibly for months. A doorman in a pristine uniform stepped forward, clearly briefed, and greeted him not with pity, but with respect. Welcome, Mr. Walker. Your room is ready. James hesitated for a moment. The heavy door opened before he could even reach for the handle. The warmth of the lobby rolled over him. Golden light, clean floors, fresh air. His eyes adjusted slowly to the sudden change in atmosphere. No one stared. No one scoffed. And for the first time in years, he walked into a building with his head held high. They showed him to a room on the 7th floor. It wasn't just a room. It was a sanctuary. A king-size bed with crisp linens. a shower with actual hot water, a window that offered a view of the city from above instead of from the cracks of a sidewalk below. Inside the closet was a tailored suit in his size. He sat down at the edge of the bed and for a moment just breathed. It was overwhelming, not because of the luxury, but because of the contrast. He hadn't realized just how much weight he had been carrying until the silence of the room lifted it all at once. There was a knock at the door. Room service. A hot meal, already paid for. Eggs. Toast. Fresh orange juice. He stared at the tray in disbelief. His stomach growled in protest and gratitude. As he ate, he couldn't stop thinking about Barron's eyes. Not just the kindness in them, but the focus, the conviction. The way he spoke like someone who'd already carried a lot on his shoulders, even at such a young age. James thought of Michael again. How he would have looked now. How he would have treated someone like him if their positions had been reversed. And he knew. Michael would have done exactly what Barron did. He finished his meal, showered, and put on the suit. It fit perfectly. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Not because the reflection had changed so much, but because for the first time in a long time, he saw a man with a future. Downstairs, a car was waiting to take him to Trump Tower. The guards greeted him by name. No smirks, no judgment, just professionalism. As they rode through the city, James stared out the window at a world that felt new again. He passed corners where he'd once panhandled, stores he used to guard, benches where he'd waited for news that never came. But none of that defined him anymore. Not today. When they arrived at the tower, the elevator opened into a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. Inside, two men greeted him with warm handshakes. "Mr. Walker, we've heard a lot about you." James wasn't used to being spoken to like that, like he was wanted. The interview was informal, respectful. They asked about his experience, his ideas on training procedures, his background in both military and civilian security. He answered with clarity, confidence slowly returning to his voice with each question. At one point, the director leaned back and smiled. "You're exactly what we're looking for." James didn't dare hope yet, but something stirred. They told him he would hear from HR by the end of the day. As he stepped out of the office, Barron was there waiting. "How did it go?" he asked. James let out a long breath. "Better than I could have imagined." Barron smiled. "Good, because I meant what I said. This isn't charity. You've earned your place. All you needed was a door to open." They walked through the lobby together, drawing glances from passers-by. Some recognized Barron immediately. Others seemed more focused on their phones. But none of that mattered. What mattered was this: dignity restored, a future reclaimed. Thank you for watching this far. If stories like this move you, please consider subscribing. Your support allows us to tell more of these powerful narratives that reveal the best in people when the world least expects it. As they exited Trump Tower, the late afternoon sun had begun to pour golden light between the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where just that morning James had stood trembling, unsure if he could ask for help. The city didn't feel as harsh now. The concrete didn't seem as cold. Somehow, even the noise of New York had softened. Barron turned to him just before they reached the waiting SUV. "There's still one more place I'd like you to go," he said. James looked puzzled. "Where?" "The VA. I called earlier. They moved your appointment to this evening. The cardiologist is staying late. Just for you." James's eyes widened. That's too much." "No," Barron replied calmly. "It's exactly enough." The SUV pulled up to the Manhattan VA Medical Center. James hadn't walked through those doors in over a year. The last time he came, he'd waited 7 hours just to be told to come back next month. But this time, the front desk nurse stood and smiled. "Mr. Walker, we've been expecting you." Everything moved quickly. Blood pressure, vitals, EKG. The doctor, an older man with a patient voice, reviewed his chart with care, not haste. "Your heart condition is manageable," he said. "But it's a blessing you came in today. Much longer without treatment could have been dangerous." James nodded quietly. "Someone made sure I showed up." When he stepped outside an hour later, Barron was still there, waiting by the SUV, sipping coffee, casually checking his tablet. James didn't have words, just a look that said everything. Barron nodded, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." They rode in silence back to the hotel. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence James had grown used to over the years. This one was peaceful, restful, like breathing after holding it in for too long. As they arrived, a staff member handed James a small envelope. Inside was a printed letter on Trump Organization letterhead. It read, "Mr. Walker, we are honored to welcome you as a candidate for the security consultant position. Your military service and your resilience speak volumes about your character. Please enjoy your stay at the hotel as our guest. We are confident this is only the beginning of something meaningful." The Trump Family Foundation. James sat on the bed in his hotel room and stared at the letter. Then he looked around the room again. The clean sheets, the suit hanging on the door, the tray with another hot meal being delivered. He wasn't dreaming. This was real. He reached for the phone on the nightstand and called the front desk. "Could you patch me through to the security office at Trump Tower?" he asked. When a voice on the other end answered, James cleared his throat. "This is Staff Sergeant James Walker. I'd like to confirm my interview time tomorrow and let them know I'll be there early." Before he hung up, he turned toward the window. The skyline was glowing now, as if the whole city had been waiting for him to notice it again. Then he picked up the business card Barron had given him. "If anything goes wrong, if you need help, if someone makes you feel like you don't belong." But for the first time in years, James didn't feel like he needed a lifeline. He was standing on his own feet again. It's incredible what a single act of kindness can set in motion. And if this story has reminded you of someone in your life who once needed help or offered it, share it. Let this story be a spark for someone else. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button now. We're building a community that believes dignity can still exist in a noisy world. Let's keep it growing. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of James's hotel room. For once, he hadn't woken up to sirens or footsteps or the ache in his back from cold pavement. He'd slept through the night, deeply, without interruption, wrapped in clean sheets and hope. He stood in front of the mirror again, adjusting the collar of his suit. The man staring back at him still had lines on his face and silver in his beard, but something in his eyes had changed. He looked steady, ready, alive. At 8:30 sharp, he stepped into the Trump Tower lobby and was greeted with nods from staff. They already knew his name. He met with HR, filled out the necessary forms, and completed one more conversation with the security director who had interviewed him the day before. At the end of their talk, the director leaned forward and extended his hand again. "Welcome to the team, Sergeant Walker. You're going to help us raise the bar." James gripped his hand firmly. "Thank you. I won't let you down." The walk back to the hotel was slow and intentional. He passed the same corners that had once witnessed his lowest days, and this time he looked people in the eye. Some still averted their gaze. Others glanced, unsure of what they were seeing. But he didn't care. He wasn't invisible anymore. Outside the hotel, he saw someone he recognized. A young man huddled against a building, coat too thin for the February wind. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He walked over and knelt slightly. "Here," he said. "It's not everything, but it's something." The young man looked up, startled. "Why?" James smiled gently. "Because someone helped me when I needed it. And now it's my turn." He stood and walked into the hotel, his head high. Upstairs, a new letter awaited him at the front desk. _Mr. Walker, we are honored to have you join our team. Your first assignment begins Monday morning. Uniforms and materials will be delivered to your room. We're proud to work with you, Barron Trump, Executive Liaison, Trump Organization. James held the note for a long moment. And then, as he sat down near the window with a coffee in hand, he pulled out the old photograph of Sarah and Michael. He didn't cry this time. He smiled. He knew they would understand. Sarah would forgive him for breaking his promise not to beg, because it wasn't begging. It was courage. And Michael, he would be proud, not just because his father found his way back, but because he was already thinking of who he could help next. Before we close, let this story leave you with this truth. Sometimes the biggest changes in life don't come from sweeping gestures or grand opportunities. Sometimes they begin with something as small as $1 and a willingness to ask. We hope this story moved you. If it did, help us bring more voices like James's to light. Hit the subscribe button and be part of our mission to remind the world that humanity still matters. And if you'd like to watch another powerful moment of unexpected compassion, click the video on your screen now. You won't believe what happened when Donald Trump discovered one of his most loyal supporters was homeless. This is Untold Narratives, and we're just getting started.